us, getting this sort of firsthand knowledge from incredible people in the field who I am feeling really privileged to have been able to bring all together at once, is going to be an opportunity for us to connect to that larger community of the actual publishing industry. How and where all of these connections happen is an ongoing process. So we're starting to build internships and trying to make connections at that level as well for our students. But I think just hearing from them and getting a really clear sense of how people make the choices that they make in order to get into these careers is a gift to all of us here today. So I would like to go ahead and get started. And I'm going to allow the speakers each to sort of introduce themselves and tell us about their career, their track, their experiences, without going back to the bios, because everyone has access to the bios and you can look at those freely at another time. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start with you, Jessica. And we'll go in the order sort of that they appear in the flyer, if that's okay.
Yeah, so I am Jessica Williams. I'm an executive editor at HarperCollins, most specifically the William Morrow imprint. I know imprints might seem like a weird thing. They're essentially like little brands that are within a larger publishing house. I have the privilege of publishing your professor's book, Carmen and Grace, which we have been hard at work on, and it's coming along so beautifully. So everyone look out for that in winter 2023, which feels a long way away, but I think one thing you'll kind of learn about publishing is that it's very long and slow moving. And maybe we can give you a little clarity about why it's so slow within this process, but I think some of it is just because you need people to sort of read the book and then tell someone else to read the book, and you know that kind of goes on and on down the line. So I came into publishing in a more circuitous route. I think a lot of people might tell you that. I consider myself more of a failed academic in that I was in grad school and I was really broke and I was waiting tables and I thought I'm never going to get a job. And then I thought, well, what can I do with all of these books that I've read? And that's when I thought, oh, I know, I'll move to New York and I'll work in publishing. But I did that, but I couldn't get a job in publishing. So then I got an internship at a literary agency, and agents are the sort of like a manager or almost like a lawyer that rep the writers and help them get, you know, good publishing deals and help them get published to begin with. And so I worked there for about 6 months for free. You know, I had to work nights and weekends to try to be able to do that internship. I'm not sure if they pay now. This was around 2008. So that process might have changed. They didn't pay then. And so I would read through slush and queries and sort of respond and then pass along things to agents that I thought seemed promising. And then from there, I got a job as a literary scout, which is sort of, I guess, a secret job in publishing where you're reading a lot of things that are on submission to publishing houses from agents. And you're reading those for your foreign publishers who are your clients, and also for film clients who are looking to sort of nab up the rights before other people know about the book. And so a scout is kind of like a publishing gossip in a sense. And so I did that for about a year. It was an also very low paying gig. So I was still working nights and weekends at that time. And then I got my first job as an editorial assistant, an equally low paying gig, I'm sorry to say. This was about 2011. And then from there, I was able to work my way up. An editorial assistant role starts out kind of administrative, but you're working closely with, I was working under an executive editor, but it can be varying levels of editors. And you're kind of a shadow or an apprentice for that editor. And you're helping them, you know, manage all aspects of the publication process. But while you're doing that, you're also learning how to essentially do their job so that at some point you can be promoted to editor, and then, you know, on and on and on up from there. I know that's like a long roundabout process. I'm not sure I can kind of even begin to try to encapsulate the role of an editor. It's a really tough question. It's everything from, you know, obviously the main job is acquiring projects for the publishing house. And that entails, tons of submissions. You're meeting with lots of different agents. Sometimes you're going to writer conferences. You're reading a lot. Most of that reading is done on nights and weekends or in other free time. You're not really doing that during your work day, because during the work day, the editor is also sort of the project manager for every single publication that they're managing, that they've acquired or have perhaps even inherited. And that means you're attending cover meetings, you're concepting the cover, you're editing the books very closely with the writer. You're talking to legal and sales and foreign rights teams and other scouts, maybe even. So there's a lot. I think the editor has their hands in almost everything. And so you end up wearing a lot of hats and doing a lot of roles. We're negotiating contracts, which is crazy. I don't know why editors are doing that. We're not lawyers. But we're sort of the point person for everything that happens around a book, which I think can be a really good thing for a writer, because that relationship that they have with their editor can make them feel as if they have an advocate in everything that is happening in-house around their book, and that they also have this person who they can talk to about every part of the process. I know it sounds probably kind of opaque on the outside, but I think the editor's role is constantly evolving as publishing evolves, and you try to just hold to the core values of, being great on the page, being a great advocate for your writers, and, trying to bring in really great projects. I think that's it. That's a lot.
Yeah, you're probably going to get a lot of questions, so it's good to just kind of give whatever is the intro, and then we'll let people sort of ask for specifics. So actually, now that we have one editor, I'd love to go to you, Amber, if that's okay, so we can sort of get at maybe two different routes, since I know Jessica just talked about having been an English major and thinking maybe she would go into academia, and then I know that your experience at City was a little different. So is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think my path was slightly more straightforward. So I grew up in the Bronx. I didn't really know a lot about publishing. I knew I loved reading. And so when I went to college, I first started at a private college. I was an English major. And, a lot of what I heard was, you can be a teacher, and that's about it, which is exactly what I wanted to do. So I actually transferred out of that school because it was very expensive. And I ended up going to Hostos Community College, which is right in the Bronx. And I went there for a couple years before I transferred to City College. At City College, that's sort of where I found out that publishing was a viable career opportunity. Before that, I had no idea what happened with books, how they ended up at the bookstore, and like all the different, teams and people that go into making a book. So it was really great to hear about, the City College program. So the program at City College, and at this time I was still an English major, so I was doing this program alongside my undergrad. And it's called the Publishing Certificate Program. And there you take about 4 classes over the course of, a couple or a few semesters. And you also have to do an internship. And when I was there, I took a lot of classes that sort of introduced the industry to me, told me that about a bunch of the different departments there, from, editorial to marketing to sales, which was a real eye opener for me in terms of like figuring out what I wanted to do. I had a sense that I wanted to do editorial since I, like to write my own stories, and I love to edit other people's stories. And I figured this might be a good path for me. And I think that was really solidified when I took a class called the editorial process, which sort of took us from a manuscript, which is what most editors read when they get in a submission from an agent, to a published book. Which is what you see when you go to buy a book in the bookstore or wherever. And it was just really great to see all the different ways that editors are involved with books and how we get to help, writers and authors create these stories. I just found that really compelling. And so from there, I did an internship at Akashic Books, which is a small press in Brooklyn. And then I worked at Inkwell for a bit. which is an agency. I was just like a general office assistant there, so it doesn't really count. And then I worked at a small press that did like coffee table books. But I knew I wanted to be in literature. And so after a few months, I made the switch to work at William Morrow, which the lovely Jessica currently works at. I worked under two executive editors there. One who did mostly fiction and some nonfiction, the other who did sort of nonfiction pop culture. And there I really got to see, how books were made and how editors were making decisions about what to put on their list. A list is sort of just like a description of like all the different kind of books they buy in a year. So I was doing that kind of work, working alongside my bosses. I was there for about a year. And then I worked at Harper, another imprint under HarperCollins. And I was there for about three and a half years, I want to say. So altogether about 4.5 years there at Harper. It was a really good learning experience, sort of having my hands in all these different genres. I really learned a lot about how to position a book, how to market a book, how to edit a book in all these really different and interesting ways, which is really fun, especially when you're sort of like being an apprentice to someone with a lot of experience. So after Harper, I moved to my current position at Penguin Random House, and I work under the Tiny Reparations books imprint, which is a new imprint that was founded by Phoebe Robinson, who is an author, a comedian, actress, and it's just been really great to be here over the last year or so because I do most of the acquiring for the list, and it feels really good to be able to start something from the ground up. And so I'm really sort of helping to develop the taste for this imprint and just put out books that I really believe in and that Phoebe believes in and that people in industry believe in. My personal goal in publishing has always been to amplify diverse voices, whether that's, Black, Indigenous people of color, queer people, disabled people. That's always been my goal. And that's the mission of Tiny Reparations books. So it's really great to be where like my interests aligns. And yeah, it's really great to be here now. And as Jessica said, as an editor, we're doing a little bit of everything every day: project management, editing, reading, calls with agents like Sumia. It's a job I really enjoy. It's hard, and you do work some weekends and nights, but I find it really fulfilling.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. So now that you mentioned Sumia, I think we can go ahead and segue into Sumia and talk about literary agents and sort of the role and relationship between the agents and the editors.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for being here, especially during midterms and everything. I know probably some of you are coming from, the author curiosity side, and some of you are coming from more the what do I do after I graduate, or, what can I do besides teaching, which is what everybody says when you're an English major. Not that there's anything wrong with teaching. It's not for everyone. Not everyone can be a good teacher. So I hope this is helpful on, from whatever angle you're coming in. And I think agents are sort of everyone kind of imagines what an editor is. Agents are kind of less clear what we do. So I'm happy to kind of be here to explain that. Essentially, we represent authors. Our main job is to find a publishing house to publish our author's work. So that's kind of like the basics of what an agent does. But a good agent, and most agents have a roster of clients that they help through the whole publication process, whether that's sort of editing the book or the proposal to get it to a point where you can submit it to a publishing house, and then advising them throughout the whole process. And we also handle all the financials of an author and make sure we review the royalty statements and make sure everything's safe. So we're kind of like we're basically just a kind of overall talent management person for authors. And they're it's a really fun job for people, especially people who are a little bit more independent minded, and who kind of like to take risks, and people who are very editorially minded, who like to work on manuscripts early and kind of work with raw material kind of feeling, because the agent's always the first one to take the risk on somebody. But like most people, I thought I was going to go into editorial. I actually started my career in publishing because a friend of one of my close teachers in college was part of this kind of reader community, and being a giant reader and a huge nerd, I was also part of this online community. And she was telling me that, I should do an internship at this publishing company. And that was sort of the first time I'd ever really heard about, how books get published. So I went to a state school in San Francisco. I was already in an urban place, so I decided to take the internship while I was still in college. And that was a really great opportunity for me to get some unpaid work under my belts while I was still kind of in the college sphere. I mean, to be clear, I'm pretty sure the laws and the culture of publishing now require internships to be paid. I know everywhere that I've worked in the last several years have been paid, but they're not really, it's not really a situation where you can totally support yourself. And like Jessica, I definitely had second jobs throughout the very beginning of my my career. But from that internship came my first job at this publishing company. It was a small independent, and I kind of interned with them on and off for a long time. I stayed connected to them. I had some mentors there. And finally, when one of the editors left because he was getting carpal tunnel syndrome from being a writer and an editor and decided he just needed to work on his novel, a position opened up, and I started as an editorial assistant there. And being a small independent, I had my hands in a lot of different things, whether it was kind of the production schedule, whether it was, kind of author management, some marketing things. So ultimately, it did kind of prepare me in a way to become an agent, because as agents, we really have to handle everything as well. And I was pretty sure I would just work at that small publishing company for the rest of my life. I was pretty happy there. But unfortunately, it was it suffered in the recession. Like a lot of, small publishing companies don't have a lot of margins, and they don't have the corporate backing that the big publishers do. So I made my way to New York from California, and I started working as a literary scout, which Jessica explained a little bit. Kind of a niche job, but a great way to kind of get a sense for the publishing industry at large. And if you love to read and talk to people and kind of just be in the mix, it's a really fun entry point in publishing. And from there, I started working for an agent as her foreign rights director, selling translation rights to her books. So that's another kind of niche part of the job. And you'll find that in publishing, there are a lot of niches. And if you can sort of fall into one that works for you, it can be a great way to enter publishing. And so as a foreign rights director, I traveled to book fairs and sold translation rights to my agency's books, and also started to build my own list of authors. And from there, I moved on to a bigger agency, and then finally where I am now. And I still handle foreign rights and translation rights for the rest of the current agency's list, and have my own authors. And that's sort of my path in a nutshell.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. So Rio, let's go ahead and go to you, because then I think we'll open to questions. And also, I think there's some general questions that maybe all of you might want to take a stab at. So Rio?
Sure. Hi. My name is Rio Cortez. I work at HarperCollins with Jessica, but we work in separate departments. So I don't work in editorial. I work in sales department, which is very different. I work in sales and retail marketing. So I'll explain a little bit about how that came to be. I started in college also editing my our literary journal, Dark Phrases at Sarah Lawrence, which was dedicated to Brown and Black voices, which was really exciting. And I knew that I wanted to work in books, and where I went to school, a lot of people, there weren't majors, which was why I went, but a lot of people were focused on their writing. And so I think, just like you were talking about, Melissa, there was that community sort of pushing each other into literary circles or ways to be with books. And so publishing for me just felt like a way I could get paid to work with books. And it was very modest in the beginning. I started out as a sales assistant at Penguin before the merger with Random House. And sales wasn't really particularly appealing to me. It just was a place for me to kind of get my foot in the door. But then once I was there, I think I ended up staying in sales. It felt like a place that particularly lacked a lot of representation from diverse perspectives. And that was harder at the beginning of my career. I think sometimes I still face challenges there. But what's interesting to me about working in the sales department, so I worked at Penguin in adult publishing, and then I went on to Simon & Schuster Children's Publishing. And then I went on to Abrams, which is sort of a smaller design publisher. And then I left publishing altogether, and I'll talk about that a little bit too. But what's interesting about sales is you're sort of the person who's presenting, in a nutshell, a book, this idea, this piece of work that someone like Jessica or Amber or Sumay, everyone has been working with so diligently and has had such attention to, but you're presented with maybe as many as hundreds throughout the year. And you have to sort of, a salesperson's role is to bring that to a person who's being presented even more books than that, who's a buyer, for example, at Barnes & Noble or Amazon or Target or Walmart or your independent bookstores. And so I think their job is to sort of to know their buyer. Their buyer's job is to know their audience at the store that they're buying for. And what I think is interesting about sales is that it's a constant distillation of a book. So it can be, I think at first for me, coming from the perspective as a writer, it was a little bit deflating to see a book distilled and further distilled by all of these different hands that it has to pass through to get into a store. But it was also a really important reality for me to be aware of, I think, as a writer at the same time, just to sort of get a sense of how much passion can go into a book. And sometimes that translates regardless of all these other sort of gatekeepers and just sort of breaks through and it's magic. And other times, I think there are a lot of practical things to learn from working in a sales department. So a lot of what we depend on the day-to-day is comparative titles. So author track, so like books, if it's a debut, for example, we look at other debuts, or if it's an author who's working on their third book, you're looking at the cold realities of sales of the first two books. Those are sort of things that we think about. And so I'll go back to sort of less sales and my trajectory. So I left publishing to become a book buyer on the other end of the table for a Black-owned bookstore in Harlem, where I live now, called the Schomburg Shop, which was really exciting. And that was whole different information, because for the first time after working in publishing, sort of being removed from the experience, it felt really exciting to put hands into the books of people in our community and to be able to talk about them in this really direct way, and to be able to shape the feeling of our store and sort of what we wanted to give to our neighborhood in that way. So I was there for 4 years. And really loved it. Came back into the industry because after 2020, I think publishing, like a lot of industries, was sort of forced to take a different look at the way that they were handling race in terms of their staffing, in terms of how their how they're servicing BIPOC authors. And so my role that I'm currently in is a result of sort of that examination, I think, at HarperCollins. And so I work in sales and retail marketing specifically for BIPOC authors and books. And it's not just publishing that did this. I mean, it's also accounts. And so we've seen accounts like Target taking something called the 15% pledge, which is committing to making 15% of the books they buy authored by Black authors. And we've seen this renaissance in Black-owned independent bookstores, so many openings of Black-owned bookstores, which is not to forget so many closures of Black-owned bookstores that happened over the last decade also. So there are a lot of interesting things happening on the sales side of things that I've personally never seen before. And so it's been exciting to be back at HarperCollins and back on this side of the table talking to accounts who feel like they're listening in a different way. I think there's still enormous room for growth, but that's sort of what I do. So I put together lists. I work a lot with our Black-owned bookstores right now. That's sort of my focus. Latinx-owned bookstores that are like also growing and flourishing. And so making partnerships with them, getting them the things that we need, setting up terms, which is sort of in the weeds, but discounting in the way that they get to buy books. So that's a little bit about what I do on the publishing side of things. But I'm also on the writing side of things. And so I know what an advocate editors like Amber and Jessica can be, because that is your person at your place when you're a writer. So I'd be happy to talk about that too. But that's a little bit about sales.
Oh, Rio, go ahead and talk a little bit about your work as a writer, because I think you are this interesting combination of someone who's actually writing and publishing, but also working in publishing, which I think a lot of our students might be interested in understanding how that even, balances out and works. So definitely talk a little bit about your writing.
Yeah, so I have an MFA in poetry, where the big bucks are. I like to joke. But if you're into poetry, you know that you're into poetry because you love it, and that's how I felt about it. So I started writing poems. I've written poems for adults, so now I have a debut collection that's coming out on Penguin, and then poems for kids. So I write picture books also. I have a lovely agent who feels very much like an advocate for my work, and a really thoughtful editor at Penguin for my poetry. And so I've been it's sort of my first year really on the side of that. I've written for many, many years, but it's my first year sort of in the ball game that way, which has been really interesting. And for me, both fit into my life pretty well. And I know that might not be the case for every writer. I'm not writing lots of prose or massive stories. And so writing poetry for me is something that I'm able to do while working in publishing. And I quite like it because I think poetry is one of those things that also is feeling like it's the way that it's being read more widely in America. And so that's been kind of exciting to be witnessing also on the publishing end and also on the reader end of things.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. So we have a very nice open window for questions. And I think that you are free to sort of select a person you'd like to ask the question to, or say, anyone who would like to try to answer this question, go ahead and open the question in that way. But also, I do want to invite you to think about what are things that perhaps you don't know about these careers or about these trajectories or about publishing that, one or more of them might be able to answer, but also we might be able to, I feel like, learn new questions to ask. This is like my new thing, especially with my students, because the world is changing so rapidly. And I feel like asking someone in publishing right now, well, what are the books the publishing is looking for? That's changing. And it's definitely changed in the time that I've been writing. So I'm really curious too, to learn what some of the new questions, some of the new things that are coming about. I think, all of you have touched on that, that we can generate some of these new questions as well, because I think there's just a lot that is available to us in this incredible pool of knowledge. So in order to ask a question, I think, Joseph, what is the best way they should indicate with the raised hand? And then we can kind of unmute, or they can unmute themselves.
Yeah, I think a raised hand, and I'll keep the list. And if you're somewhere where you can't verbalize your question, just put it in the chat, and I'll notify you somebody has a question. Sound good?
Excellent. Excellent.
Start with Kathleen.
Let me unmute myself here. Thank you very much. I'm the chair of the BCC English department, and I just wanted to thank everyone for being part of this panel and for coming today, and particularly Dr. Coss for setting this up and organizing such a great event. And Dr. Coss may have told all the panelists that we are really working in our English major to try to build in more knowledge, of course, about publishing and various industries other than teaching that our majors could go into. And so I guess my question, and this is just to all of our wonderful panelists, what could we do to support our students better in, entering in any avenue of this industry? I think we really have that question, and we're very serious about it. So I know that's a big question, but any feedback would be welcome. So
I can answer that, or at least start answering it. I think there have been increasing, well, you probably noticed that everyone started their career with an internship. And I think that's a really one really valuable thing that you could encourage students to do, particularly because they are in the Bronx. They're not very far from Manhattan. A lot of internships are now going like hybrid or remote. But having access to Manhattan is a big plus that your students have that a lot of even more enfranchised students don't. So I think, kind of helping to build resources about how to put together an application for an internship, where to look for them, different contacts, because the number one thing that people in publishing talk about is that foot in the door, and it can be such a random thing. But you really can't expect to get an entry-level job without having at least some familiarity with the industry still. And if
love of books.
Well, a love of books is a given. It's not really an industry you would want to go into without it. And then another thing I was thinking is a lot of different organizations have created fellowships for entry-level students. And I think, I'm happy to kind of like offline give some of these organizations, but just giving access to these few fellowships where they either provide mentorship or they provide some kind of internship or in-person one-on-ones or whatever it is. Again, that can be a point of contact for that foot in the door. So I think those two things, if the English department can help students navigate those two elements, I think it would really be welcome in the industry, because people are looking for more ways to connect with students outside of the usual networks of just, nepotism.
I would like to add, and this might sound a little counterintuitive, but like office skills, knowing how to make a spreadsheet, knowing how to use Outlook, knowing how to use social media, like all of these are skills that you don't necessarily learn in a classroom when you're in college, but as soon as you start in a role, you're going to be expected to know how to do all of these things. Even if you're working in editorial, I rely, one, on myself to have a certain set of technological skills, and then also on my associate, and same in the marketing department. I can't necessarily speak for sales and other departments, but you know, there's this expectation that you sort of come into the door knowing how to use these office elements, because we need them to support and organize, and, you know, and I think just having that, no matter what your role is, it, you know, can just help you kind of hit the ground like running.
Jessica, thank you for saying that. And I just want to point out for one quick second, Jonathan, you just heard that, right? And you learned that firsthand doing the literary magazine, because you had to do spreadsheets, we had to organize submissions, and it was one of those like eye-opening moments for the editors. Oh, I'm not just going to sit here and read and sort of like think about how to make this a better piece of writing. No, we need to document everybody who submitted and make sure we contact them all and get their phone numbers and their emails correct. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, because we're trying to figure out how to incorporate a lot of these skills into our current classes. And definitely in thesis we do it, but how to, you know, how to fuse that and bring that together in a creative writing class is under work, I think, under construction is the way I would put it. But that's great. Thank you for bringing that, because it is a really important element. Great. Anybody else wanted to address that question? I think we have another one rolling up, right, Joseph? There's one in the chat.
Yes, Evgenia, if I have that correct, asks, what are the most essential skills one should develop to land a job, succeed in publishing? I think this stems from the conversation that just started. If anybody wants to build on what was said.
I think Jessica was very right about office skills. I think that's definitely going to be something you need. But I would also say, you know, a lot of something that I didn't expect when I got into publishing was public speaking. So much of our jobs is talking about books to agents, to marketing, to publicity, to people you just want to be interested in the books that you are helping to put out into the world. So I would just say, you know, to really know how to talk about books, the themes that are important and that readers would really care about, the plot that you can, you know, talk about in 3 or 4 lines, you know, how to sell the author and why they're the best person to tell this story. I think it's really important. And this is also coming from an editorial perspective, so that's a little bit different. But I think, you know, having those skills and how to talk about a book, and also how to talk about yourself, because a lot of publishing is also pitching yourself. Like I pitch myself to agents all the time and sort of talking about what I'm looking for as an editor and on my list, or like talk in panels like this, like what I stand for, what my career trajectory has been. A lot of, you know, what we do is public speaking, and I think having that skill is really important, because it'll come into play at so many different points during the publication process, and that's whether you're in sales or marketing or publicity. I just think public speaking is such a huge part of this job that a lot of people don't tell you about. I thought it was, again, like just going to be like reading and writing and like doing the admin work, but speaking is a really big part of this. And you know, just doing it over the years and getting more confident about the way I talk about myself in books has really helped me a lot. And also being a strong writer is important too. There are a lot of different things that people have to write, whether that's like presentations or copy. Copy is like something you may see on the back of the book that sort of describes what the book is, or if it's a hardcover on the jacket, on the flap, that's copy too. So some people write those things. What you see on Amazon that describes the book, that's also copy. So there are a lot of different ways that like writing skills sort of plays into what we do here. And that's also outside of my department too, but I'm just speaking from editorial because that's where I, you know, exist. So I would say, yeah, writing skills, being a strong reader, and you know, boning up on those public speaking skills is really important.
Amber, could I ask you to talk, or anyone else, about that sort of a 2-part question? First of all, are there any, I mean, like, is it expected a student coming in, say for an internship or entry-level job, has to know like copy editing, you know, like markings, that sort of thing. And then part of that is also like, how much patience is there for an intern or someone just coming into an entry-level job for learning some of these things? Or is it, them or no?
I mean, a lot of this industry is an apprenticeship. Your manager, whoever you're, under, is supposed to help you learn a lot of the different aspects of what goes into a book and the book publishing process. So yeah, there should be some patience between, manager and, your assistant. So yeah, there should be some patience, but the assistant should also be, willing to learn and adapt and all of those things too. I didn't have to know copy editing because that's a different department that's usually actually outsourced from production. But I did learn the copy editing marks in my publishing program. It's a great tool to have, and you should probably know them because if you're going into editorial, you may use some of these copy editing marks as you're editing, but it's not a prerequisite for all the different departments that exist. So it could be useful, and I would advise somebody at least know the marks, but I don't think you necessarily need it unless you're like going to be a copy editor.
Remo has a question about design and production. Do you want to expound on that, Remo?
Well, I'm an odd man out here. I'm sort of a historian at Bronx Community College. I do the tours on Gould Memorial and Hall of Fame. But for 35 years, I was in publishing. But I was in art directing and creative director. Mostly it was designing books and producing them. I haven't seen much talk about that, but that is an important component of publishing and something to maybe allow the design department or designers at the school to know about. I'm surprised that none of them are represented here. This is all about writing. I can understand that. And everything I heard today was so familiar. How you get started. Yes, I went to City College and got an English degree. And what do? No, I don't want to teach. My wife said, go do something else. So I went to Cooper Union and learned design. And I did it for I graduated from Cooper. Next week, I had a job in publishing. I was there for 35 years. It's now a company that no longer exists. It was Golden Books, a children's book company, but I did everything, science books, cookbooks, everything that came on my hands. It was a wonderful career. And finally, when the company went bankrupt, I was let go. And I was at a loss of what to do. And I got a volunteer job at Cooper, at Bronx. And I've been here for 12 years now and love it. But I still love publishing.
Remo, I want to actually address this, and then if anyone else can add to it from the panel, it would be great, because thesis has had a very interesting history with design, because all the artwork is by BCC students. So I work with the art department really closely, but we've never had a student, and there is a design department yet, that has been able to get what I consider sufficient support and funding to do the design work, because that work is really big. And so we've always done it with someone who's actually a BCC alumni, and they do it for a very low cost, more out of like love for their alma mater than anything else. But I am very interested in, especially because of what Amber said about the copy editing marks, is all of this work that has gone online sort of changed some of the industry standards around production and design, and like some of the ways that things used to be done are being done differently, and students should be thinking differently about their, preparation if they're interested in those design and art careers?
That happened a long time ago. We all switched to computers, and books are done on computers. And if you don't,
I know that part, but I want to just hear from
but you have to
the
know
industry. Yeah, let me just see if there's something that.
I'm still in the industry. I'm still designing books and working with the foreign authors. So it's a matter of knowing what the tools you need to do it. And it's
I'm
mostly
happy to answer that
Adobe.
question. Sorry to interrupt you. I'm just going to address Melissa's
Sure.
question, which is, yeah, I think design is another, I mentioned niche. I mean, maybe that's not quite the right word, but there are a lot of different areas in publishing beyond editorial, which is obviously such a, you know, an obvious fit when you are coming out of an environment where you're doing a lot of reading and writing. But design is a really great opportunity, or a place for people who like to read but are also great illustrators, because you often read the book and base your design there. It's also a really wonderful place for more you know, representation to work, like Rio was saying about sales. You know, there are these kind of areas where traditionally there hasn't been a lot of representation, and so, you know, we do judge books by their covers, and it would be really great to have more people in all of the different departments. And I think generally all the departments in publishing offer internships, and yeah, I think it's a great industry generally to get your feet wet and see if it's something that works for you. So, you know, I know this is sort of the English department's overview, but there are a ton of different sections and jobs and areas, you know, contracts, if it's something like, if somebody's considering going into law school, but they're not totally sure it's for them, you know, you can work in the contracts department. It's a little bit better paid. You know, you're still working around books. It's a great kind of entry-level job for someone who might need a couple of years of experience before going into law school or thinking about doing that. So, you know, there are a lot of opportunities beyond agenting, beyond editorial, to get involved with publishing.
Yeah, I'll just to piggyback on that, there are a few departments that I think would benefit from any of the skills that Amber and Jessica have already mentioned in terms of writing. There's publicity department, so you would use your writing skills there to write pitches to media for press or opportunities for reviewing certain books. There's marketing, so similarly, if you have graphic design skills and you might be interested in the design or art departments, you could apply those skills in a marketing department just as well. All kinds of promotional material has to be drawn up to support marketing campaigns for books, ideas. It's a creative department to work in also, if you sort of have those instincts about what the market is looking for, or if you could identify places where there are readers that are sort of surprising and new. I think marketing is a really fun place. Production and copy editing, also, if you are very good at the English language, I feel like copy editors are incredible and pick up on so many nuances of a text that is really interesting. Sales, same with public speaking. For sales writing, you're writing presentations to your accounts. And you're public speaking constantly to your accounts, whether it's to your independent bookstore buyer or somebody at a mass merchandiser. And so all those skills, I think, are really applicable across departments. I'm sure I'm forgetting all kinds, ad promo, similarly, if you have design skills. And then also, even as publishers sort of create diversity, equity, and inclusion departments that sort of kind of can go across all of those divisions, or sometimes are really specific in terms of human resources. But there are a lot of ways that you could enter the world of publishing, I think, with a lot of the skills that an English degree gives you. That might be surprising.
Thank you. Do we have other questions? Joseph, do we have anything in the chat?
Nothing over here.
Okay. So I have a question that I get a lot from my students and I don't know how to answer, which is, what is, you know, everybody talks about not making any money. Oh, Logan, you have a question. Go ahead, Logan, you go. And then
Thank
we'll
you.
go to Jonathan. I'll come all the way at the end in case you guys ask it.
This is for everyone on the panel, and it's sort of a two-part question. First, how many books are you actually like reading within a year? And is there like a target number that publishing houses have? I think it was Jessica that said like you're usually working on a book for years, like an extended period of time. And then the second part of that is, do you deal with any reading fatigue? And if you do, how do you sort of combat that reading so much all the time?
I'm happy to start. How many books do we read in a year? I couldn't tell you because, so as an editor, at least, you know, the type of editor that like Amber and I are, which is an acquisitions editor, not a copy editor. So we're reading tons of submissions, and those submissions can be full novels. Sometimes it can just be a proposal for a novel. Say if it's a more established writer that you've been working with in the past and you're going to buy like their next book, you might see just a few chapters from them. You'll see nonfiction proposals, essay collections, memoir proposals. And I mean, I have an Excel spreadsheet and where I keep all my submissions log, and it goes all the way back to like when I started in 2011. But in how many we're reading a year, I mean, I think Amber, there was that recent thing about how many submissions and editors get in a week, and it's,
Oh yeah.
it can be like 20 to 30 you're getting in a week.
Yeah,
And
30, yeah, definitely.
and impossible to read all of those books, obviously, but then you're also editing the books that you have acquired, and they'll all be in various stages of their processes. Like maybe, you know, you're on a first edit or a second edit or a third edit. 3 edits is maybe the sort of general average, but some books will be 4 edits or 5 edits or 2 or 1, you know, sort of depending on the type of book that it is. And then you're also needing to be reading within the published space. So you understand like, where is the marketplace? Like Rio was mentioning, we need to be able to find comp titles for our own books so we can really advocate for our books internally as an editor. So we have to be reading those books and also trying to keep up with, you know, how literature and the landscape is evolving by reading those books that are, you know, other people are loving. Some of which happen to be on the bestseller list. And then other times you want to be reading books by, say, you know, a writer who had a really splashy small press debut, thinking, oh, I want to read this writer, and then potentially I could try to, you know, bring him into a large house versus, you know, because sometimes if someone does really well, let's say like a coffee house or a great independent, they might want to make a jump to one of the major trades. So you're reading so widely. You're not always reading the whole book. Yes, I think reading fatigue is a thing, but I would say there is this immense pleasure of reading published books that I really love as an editor, because I so rarely get to do it without feeling really guilty. Like if I'm reading, then I should be reading my submissions. But when I read a published book that's been edited and like beautifully packaged and designed, it's just an entirely different experience. And I think it can remind you like why we got into this to begin with. Yeah, so that's my spiel.
I think Jessica just about covered all of it on the editorial side. So I'll let Samia jump in. It looked like she was about to say something.
I'm always about to say something. Thanks, Amber. Yeah, it is a real thing. I think, you know, the number one thing we see in very junior people's cover letters is, I am a voracious reader, or I love to read. And for people in publishing, especially on our side, but even in the other areas that Rio was talking about, that's like saying, oh, I breathe oxygen. Like we just, that's a very basic thing. How we read is really different. And I think what it ends up being is you sort of have pockets of categories that you're reading in, and you're sort of approaching it in really different ways. So I still read a lot for fun. I mean, a lot, probably less than I would if I didn't work in publishing. But it's a completely different experience for me because I'm turning off the critical part of my brain, or I'm turning off the professional part, I should say. And I'm turning off the categories. I'm not thinking, oh, is this a potential author? Is this a current client of mine that I'm reading for an editorial eye? Is this, even something that I saw on submission in the query pile and decided not to take on? I try to read for pleasure with, always with the context of what everybody else is talking about in the industry at large, but just as kind of for pleasure. What's interesting about agents is that, from a really crass perspective, we make money through sales. So unless you are Stephen King's agent and you're getting 15% of his royalties, you really do have to kind of be active. And there's something really joyful about that. So I often try to read, literary journals and be connected with different MFA programs throughout the country, who I think are doing really cool things. So there's a wide variety of things that we're reading and a wide range of approaches that we're taking to the experience of reading. But of course, reading fatigue is real, especially editorial fatigue. And on the agency side, we kind of have to pick and choose how many clients we can realistically take on and still do the editorial work, still be that advocate and be strong and be by their side for all of the things that happen after the sale or even before the sale, and still have a dynamic list where you have new projects coming through. So that can be, I know that's a little bit of a side to your question, but just to kind of give a little bit of a professional outlook from an agent's perspective. Sometimes authors feel really rejected when an agent doesn't go for something that they're doing, but it might be because they have something similar on their list, or it might be because their list is really full. It could be a lot of different reasons besides the quality of the work itself. And sometimes all my clients finish their revisions at once, and sometimes I have a lot of space in my list and I start reading more voraciously in the unsolicited queries pile. So it's kind of an ever shifting mountain, but it's always a mountain.
Real quick, we have a question from Cindy in the chat, and you'd mentioned the sort of economic conditions of books. And Cindy asks, is there a budget when it comes to publishing a book? If so, what is it? And what is the process after all the editing takes place on the book?
I'm happy to speak to some of the budget questions. Is there a budget when it comes to publishing a book? Yes, but I would say it's like ever evolving. Just because a book is acquired at say, what might be a smaller advanced level does not mean it wouldn't then have a very big budget for the publication. And I think this comes down to what sort of Rio and Amber have been talking about advocacy, salesmanship in-house, the strength of a read. When after the editing process is done, the editor will then present, all the editors start to present that whatever that season is about a year out at what we call a launch meeting. And from that launch meeting, a lot of sort of organic excitement can start to happen, and then that can change a budget on a book. And the budget is also divided between, say, publicity has their own budget, and it is based on the book. Say, if a book lends itself to a tour, then there's going to be money for the tour, whereas some other books might lend themselves more to advertising, and then there might be money for advertising. Same with marketing. So it's very distinct budgets within the departments and for each book. But I wouldn't say that just because an idea or an estimate is set at the point of acquisition doesn't mean that that book will sort of stick to that budget. There's a lot that we want to be sort of nimble and able to evolve based on the enthusiasm around the work.
Yeah, I would just add to that. So I read on submissions from sales in order at a certain level in order to provide estimates for a project that an editor perhaps wants to make a big spend on. And so me and other sales colleagues will read and take a look at sort of what other books have performed at that level and sort of there is a plan, and there's a finance department also we didn't talk about, but it has to make sense on the acquisitions side at first to get it over. And then like Jessica is saying, things are a lot more fluid, but sometimes a budget can start at the level of acquisition depending. I think the great reads come from more modest budgets, but when things have a big expectation up front, that sort of puts the pressure on all of these departments that sort of go right into action once the editorial work of a book is made. And that's your marketing and your publicity and your sales and your ad promo. All those departments sort of start to do their work after a book is launched and is already put together by its editorial team.
Melissa, we can't hear. Melissa, you're muted. Sorry.
Jonathan, you want to go ahead with your question now?
Hi, everybody. First of all, I want to really thank the panelists for being here today. It's a really exciting opportunity to kind of learn from people who are in the industry. I'm sorry. And because I've been a part of Thesis for so long, I was the editor in chief of Thesis, and I held a couple of other positions in Thesis, and I kind of got to Thesis with the idea that I can use an editorial position as a stepping stone to being an author. But then I found out from somebody in the industry that might not be the best route to take. So I was curious about what are the differences for somebody who wishes to pursue a career in the industry as a writer versus an editor, and what advice would you have for them?
Well, I would say editorial, while it's sometimes seen as the most obvious role, is also incredibly time consuming. And where it's a role that the 9 to 5 day to day does not end up being your actual job, which is to read submissions, acquire books, and edit books. It ends up being more about like the actual publishing operations, attending cover meetings, meeting with production, all of those things to kind of help shepherd the book through the publication process, which then means, like, to be perfectly honest, I couldn't tell you the last time I didn't work a weekend. I don't remember. And when I was first starting out as a young editorial assistant, I remember having lunch with an older editor who said, if you don't want to work every single weekend, don't be an editorial. And so not every editor maintains that schedule. That's not always, some people are able to establish like different boundaries for themselves. But if you want to be a writer and that's your main goal, there might be a different job in publishing that would allow you to be really done at like say 5:30 or whatever it is. And then you could have your nights and your weekends to focus on your writing.
I'll say from an agent's perspective, it's always appealing to see some kind of interest or activity in a literary sphere, and journals are a huge plus for that. And I think the reason for that is a lot of writers come to writing for different reasons, and agents are looking for people who are going to be in it for the long haul, and they're really serious about literature, and they understand literature beyond their own writing. So committing yourself and your effort and your spare time to editing is a really huge bonus in your bio as a writer when you're going to create a query letter. I'd say another big benefit that Melissa touched on at the very beginning, or Dr. Coss touched on at the very beginning of our conversation, was a community of writers. And this is something that I think people really sort of need as you work on a book length project. You need to be connected with other writers who like your work, who understand your work, who value your opinion, and vice versa. And just kind of not working in a vacuum is really important. So I think, being connected to something like Thesis and having an understanding for how something like that comes together in the editorial process, even from your own point of view, ideally you've met a couple of people along the way. You're connected to an organization that's a little bit bigger than yourself. And I think there's great value in my experience for authors, especially authors of color who don't necessarily feel like their voice is understood or heard in every literary sphere. And, you know, some might say in most literary spheres, it's really good to be connected to something that feels like it's your literary contribution.
Melissa, sorry, we can't hear you.
I forget. We have 2 more questions in the chat, and then I want to be mindful of the time because I know, you know, some of the students have class, I teach it too, and the panelists have really given us fantastic time. But there's another question here that was about literary journals, if there are any specific ones that you recommend. And also there's a question about the role of social media in publishing. So maybe what we can do is start with the social media question. It was first in the chat. And if anybody just wants to kind of jump on how social media has kind of changed, and maybe Rio, you might want to start since you kind of know how the publicity angle on it, you know, has taken a different turn using social media, but any of you that want to add. And then we'll take a quick think about, you know, the journals that you guys are reading or looking at, and might recommend to some of our students.
Cool, yeah, I'll try, and then I'll add some journals to the chat too. Social media, I think, has been changing the way that the course of publishing in some ways for many years. There are all kinds of trends and ebbs and flows. There's a certain point where people who are YouTube celebrities were getting book deals. I think it's still really relevant, whether an author, depending on the book or the type of writing that you're doing, it's still it's relevant what your social media activity and your presence online looks like. I think it's less relevant for certain writers, but I feel like almost everyone. And then some people, their platform on social media is sort of the piece that is most important in their publishing of a book. I think that might not be so much the case with Amber or Jessica's lists, but there are people whose just platform is what gives them opportunities to publish and write. And so I would say it's really important. I mean, I think in the way that publishers are engaging themselves on social media is a place that there are a lot more roles on the publishing side for. So people who are proficient in marketing departments with TikTok and Instagram Reels, and who can sort of be part of that cultural conversation in the way that we promote books is something that I think the industry is really looking for. There's this new thing blowing up called Book Talk. I'm an old millennial myself, so it's a little out of my comfort zone, but it's a place where we're seeing a lot of activity that translates into book sales. And so I think both on the industry side, I think it's really important to have that experience. And I think still very relevant on the writerly side also. Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have hundreds of thousands of followers, but that you're proficient across those platforms and could engage a community of interested readers or like-minded individuals, I think is a selling point for publishers too.
I would also say that Bookstagram is a big thing now too. Using Instagram as a tool to have people talking about the book, doing photo shoots with the book, and just sort of creating that online community and buzz as we build towards publication. I think that's become a really integral part of the process for marketing and publicity when talking about the book. And a lot of publishing houses have started to create a list of like BIPOC bookstagrammers so that they're reaching, people who are of the community that the book may be engaging with, which is another way to be sort of authentic in the way that they're presenting the book and who the audience is and how to tap into that. So yeah, social media is increasingly important. And obviously each book is different, but I think it's a big piece of it that I think can really help with sales or at least recognition or for the book along the way.
Yeah, I feel like I'm different in a totally different zone. My Zoom house is not this one. Anybody want to add to the list of the literary journals? I, of course, am going to recommend Thesis, but also I want to share for all the students who are here today that we are going to be putting out an announcement for adding staff to Thesis this year. And I am adding a section in our e-portfolio giving you a list and links to literary journals other than Thesis, because I think that it's become really important to see a school-based publication in the context of many of the literary journals that are out there. Start that way, they're campus-based, and then they sort of expand their submissions to the community, and they have a lot of they have histories of how they change and evolve over time. And, you know, sort of bringing us back to what inspired me to do these events this year in this way, I have to tell you that I am, you know, in addition to teaching and writing and overseeing Thesis, I am not a huge, like, let's do 100 events person, because it's all work, right? But I'm doing 10 events around publishing because of the 10 years of student work that has gone into Thesis. It's just extraordinary to see students balance all these things and do the work of editing and selecting work and taking submissions and all of that. So it's wonderful to have all of you here today. I am extremely grateful to the panelists who took time out of obviously mountains of reading, right? They carved out a little hole to come and visit with us, which we are very grateful for. And also to everyone who has participated. Get involved is my main thing. I just tell everyone, get involved with something. It doesn't have to be Thesis, although of course I would love it to be Thesis, but any literary community that you join, be it Instagram, online, start somewhere and then keep trying to find home, because it takes a long time. You don't right away click. And a lot of the writer friends that I have now are people that I discovered by participating in many different things and then finding like, oh, we kept seeing each other in those places. We probably have something in common. So I do want to invite all of the students and faculty and other staff members from BCC or the community who are interested in writing to just do that thing of getting connected to other writers, because it's incredibly undervalued. But it is really vital to actually developing your skill and your survival as a writer. So thank you again. Thank you so much. If there's any parting words the panelists would like to say, I'd like to give them that opportunity, and then we can close down.
Oh, my sound is already on, so I guess I'll go. I guess my parting note is to, say what Dr. Coss said, is like build your community, read widely. If you're a writer, if you're like writing in a particular genre, don't only read that genre, read everywhere, because I think that's just going to bone up your knowledge of books and what's out in the marketplace. I would say take note of what's on sort of bestseller lists, so you understand what trends are working and what publishers are really looking for. That'll also help you if you're trying to get into a publishing job, because you know what's out there and what people are really looking for. That'll help you sort of develop your niche, as Samia was talking about earlier. And yeah, that's pretty much it for me. Thanks for having me also.
Yeah, thank you so much, Melissa, and to the whole department for putting this together. I think my parting words are, don't get too caught up with a part of publishing our books that doesn't feel like it's yours. Just keep looking for what is yours, and keep looking for something that feels authentic. And usually it's it can be a really small group, but you have to put in the effort to find it, because I feel like some writers and people in publishing early on, you feel really discouraged because the dominant environment feels maybe not like it's for you. But the beauty of social media and a lot of these smaller journals and different opportunities